In the heart of the ancient forest surrounding Elmsbrook, the trees whispered secrets only the wind could carry. The villagers lived on its edge, fearful of its depths. Stories of spirits, curses, and long-lost love floated like echoes in the air. But for Celeste, the woods weren't a place of fear. They were her refuge. She felt a quiet bond with its silence, its shadows, and the soft, eternal song of the river. She didn't believe in the tales others told, not until the night everything changed. It was a cool evening when Celeste wandered deeper into the woods than ever before. The forest seemed alive, the air heavy with something she couldn't name. At the riverbank, she saw him. He stood motionless, his figure illuminated by the moonlight. His dark hair fell over his shoulders, and his eyes, they seemed to hold the weight of centuries. The moment their gazes met, Celeste felt the world around her pause. His presence was magnetic, like the forest itself had come alive to introduce them. He didn't speak, yet his silence said more than words ever could. Without knowing why, Celeste felt drawn to him, as if their meeting had been written long before this moment. Back in the village, Celeste couldn't shake the memory of the man by the river. His image haunted her thoughts, his eyes lingering in her mind like an unanswered question. Seeking guidance, she visited the elder, a woman whose wisdom carried the weight of the forest's history. The elder looked at her, her expression grave. She handed Celeste a small amulet, etched with symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in her palm. "Take this," the elder said, her voice firm. "If you've met him, you'll need it. The forest has its stories, and those who get too close often find themselves trapped in them." But Celeste only smiled, brushing off the elder's warning. She didn't believe in curses or spirits. Not yet. Celeste returned to the river the next evening, her heart pulled by a force she couldn't resist. He was there, waiting, just as she'd hoped. The two of them sat by the water, the forest around them alive with quiet magic. She spoke of her dreams, her fears, and her sense that she was destined for something beyond the village. Though he listened silently, his presence felt like a reply. But there was something else. A sadness lingered in his gaze, an unspoken burden. Celeste noticed the way his hand hovered just above hers, never quite touching. She wanted to ask him what held him back, but the words died on her lips. The forest seemed to watch them, its shadows growing longer as the night deepened. The next time they met, the air around them was heavier. The river seemed louder, the forest quieter, as if holding its breath. He stood before her, his expression distant and pained. And then he spoke. "I'm not what you think I am," he told her, his voice carrying a sorrow that made her chest tighten. He revealed the truth. He was once a healer, loved by the village, but when tragedy struck, the villagers blamed him. In their anger and grief, they cursed him, binding his spirit to the forest. He was no longer alive, but not quite dead, a shadow caught between worlds. Celeste's heart ached as he spoke. The forest she loved, the one she thought she understood, had become his prison. She wanted to help him, to free him. But he stopped her. "To break the curse," he said, "requires a sacrifice. One you might never recover from." That night, Celeste dreamed of him. She stood in the forest, bathed in golden light. He reached for her, his eyes filled with longing, but as their hands nearly touched, shadows pulled him away. She woke with tears streaming down her face, her heart pounding with a decision she could no longer avoid. The elder's warning echoed in her mind. The forest doesn't forget. But Celeste couldn't turn away. Love was worth any risk, any price. Under the light of the full moon, Celeste returned to the river. The man, Lucien, as she now called him, tried to stop her, his voice trembling with fear and love. But Celeste wouldn't listen. She stepped forward, taking his hand despite the chill that ran through her. She whispered words of love, her voice steady, her resolve unshaken. The forest seemed to awaken, the wind swirling around them. A golden light enveloped them both, and the curse began to shatter. But as the chains that bound him broke, Lucien began to fade. "You've set me free," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "But freedom means I must go." His form shimmered, his edges dissolving into the air. Celeste reached for him, but it was too late. He was gone. The forest felt different the next morning, lighter, as if it too had been freed. Celeste returned to the river, her heart aching with loss, but filled with peace. She could feel him in the breeze, in the gentle rustle of the trees, in the way the sunlight danced on the water. The elder watched her from a distance, a quiet understanding in her eyes. "Love doesn't end," the elder said. "It changes, but it never leaves." And as Celeste stood by the river, she knew the elder was right. Some stories don't end. They simply take new forms, carried by the wind, the trees, and the hearts they've touched. Lucien was gone, but his love remained, etched into the very soul of the forest. Do like and subscribe this channel if you love your puppy.